Hello, Garland Nixon here, and sorry about that. I clicked at the wrong time. But what we're going to talk about is the end game for Ukraine. What does the end look like? What does the end look like from Russia's perspective? What does the end look like from the rest of the world's perspective? Ooh, I better do something here. I ain't doing so good. And what does the world look like? I mean, what does the end look like from the U.S. empire's perspective? So let's talk about this end game thing. Let's talk about plans, what people are trying to accomplish here, and what it'll look like. Let's talk. All right, let's start off with this. I'm sure you've all heard the old adage, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? But there's a lot more to it than that. In other words, if you're going to plan, if you're planning for something, you always have to decide what is it that of a win would look like. What would victory look like? There's the old philosophical discussion of people say, I want to go to heaven. And if somebody says to them, what would heaven really look like? If heaven, you believe in heaven, whether or not you don't do it, no, I'm making a point here. If a person says, I believe when you die you go to heaven, or one person, the next person says, I believe when you die, you just die. I would ask a person this: if you could really, nobody would know but you, what would heaven look like? Right? Think about that. What would heaven look like? There's a lot of people that they go to church and they're told what they're supposed to want heaven to look like, right? It's supposed to be, standing around and sitting around with a white robe all the time, singing hallelujah or something, if you're a certain type of Christian, right? Or whatever. I tell you what, I got to give the Muslims credit. The whole 72 virgins thing, a lot of people would be down with that, quiet as it's kept, right? But there are a lot of people that if they could say, what does heaven look like? It would involve all manner of debauchery, right? If you ask a lot of people, what would heaven really look like, right? You got some guy who's 21 years old. He's feeling his hormones. He's having all the fun. He may say, are you kidding me? Heaven, I'd have all the babes. I'd have all the brew. I'd have all the weed. I'd have all the music, whatever in the world his sensory perceptions find pleasant at that time, that would be heaven, right? And as you get a little older, your back's kind of hurting. Well, I like to sit around and rest a lot, maybe play some golf every now and then, maybe go fishing, So heaven, the older you get, the more heaven changes, right? But my point being this, all jokes aside, when you plan something out or when you see an end to something, right? The question has to be, does the optimal end look like? And I think that's what we need to talk about here tonight a bit. So we go with the U.S. empire, with the particularly not just the U.S. empire, but the neocons, right? The neoconservatives, the leading edge of the U.S. empire right now. And to them, you must take this into context. This is a quest for them. And it's changed, actually. If you go back to and the reason they're doing it has changed. If you go back to Zbigniew Brzezinski's 1998 book, The Grand Chessboard, right? That was about controlling the world. It was about taking over the areas of the world that you don't control. It was about U.S. hegemony, so certainly. But it was at a point where he felt that the world is the U.S. is powerful and it's on the verge of having it all. And it's how do we get it all, right? How do we take over more? How do we dismember Russia? China wasn't much of an issue, but it was how do we control everything? How do we get the things that we don't have, keep the things that we have? And the world's a grand chessboard for us to maintain power. Very, very sick and twisted, narcissistic way of viewing the world, but that's what it was about. Now, you get to 2000 and the beginning of the quote war on terror, right? What was that quest about? It was the continuation of that. It was now, remember, shock and awe. We're going to go into Iraq, but it wasn't just shock and awe in Iraq. It was shock and awe in the world. It was to demonstrate to the world the military prowess of the United States. We're going to show them the weapons we have, the planes we have. We got smart bombs. We got, oh man, smart missiles. We got tomahawks. We're going to go show the world a military with technological prowess like that has never been seen. And everyone on earth will look at us and say, oh my God, we're scared of them. And then what do? We're going to control the world. They even had a list of 7 countries they were going to overthrow, right? At that point, piece of cake. We overthrow the first one, and they felt that their power couldn't be contained. It couldn't be resisted at that point. They felt we have military power that can't be resisted, so we're going to just take everything. Now, where are we now? And what is the neocons' plan? Things have changed. Now it has come to, oh crap, our worst nightmare has come true. Other powers are arising around the world. Powers that can confront us. Powers that have the military and the diplomatic and the strategic and the economic ability to resist U.S. hegemony, and far worse than that, to spread that resistance, to resist on their own, and to provide an opportunity for countries that we have preyed on. And I say we, the U.S. empire, they don't consider me part of it, but you get the point. They can spread the resistance. Russia and China can now go to other countries and help them to resist. You saw Iran; they're helping Syria, they're helping Venezuela, Cuba, etc. So these countries are a virus, man. Russia and China, Iran, they're a virus. They can resist and they can spread this virus of resistance around the world. So now the quest has changed. The quest is now the fulfillment of what was called the Wolfowitz Doctrine. It was Paul Wolfowitz, a psychotic man who said, basically made an argument. The argument was the United States should be the eternal power, kind of like the Third Reich kind of thing, ruling forever, 1,000 years, all that crap. Just another version of it. And that if any country started rising in a manner that they could threaten our hegemony, they had to be stopped. And he particularly focused on the Eurasian region because I guess he looked at Russia and China and saw them as potential adversaries, the foremost potential adversaries. So now, in all of their infinite wisdom, the neocons see their worst, most unthinkable nightmare come true. China surpasses the industrial power of the United States and of the U.S. and the EU combined, and they're on their way up, and they are not slowing up. They are in the passing lane. They got the blinker on, and they're going by. We're seeing nothing but red taillights. And meanwhile, Russia, another very independent country, militarily, man, they got stuff that we can't stop now. They got Kinzhal and Zircon, and they got, oh man, their military technology is going through the roof. They've got Yasin class submarines. They got all kinds of stuff, and we're like, yikes, they're getting to be militarily powerful. Meanwhile, Iran is doing what Iran does. Iran's doing Iran things, and Iran's things are they're resisting. They're resisting against Israeli dominance over the Palestinians. They're resisting over U.S. dominance in the Middle East region. So the U.S. is unhappy. And of course, in South America, though they don't have a lot of power, the Nicaraguans, the Venezuelans, the Cubans are setting an example of resistance, saying, I don't care how bad you come after us. I don't care how much you sanction us. I don't care what you do. We ain't going to give. We're not going to bend. So the U.S. empire is seeing this example in South America, though they don't have the technical, they don't have the military power, they don't have the economic power. They're setting an example of resistance. So the U.S. now looks at this and says, we got to act. One other country, it's a problem. And you have to take this into account. Germany. Germany is the most powerful they're the economic engine of the EU, and they have the potential in an alliance with Russia to become strong enough to resist U.S. hegemony, and that can't be allowed to happen. So that the easy part was taking out the EU because you have your operatives in charge of the EU. You have the people in the EU under a spell, believing that they're part of the group, If you got your arm around them, hey guys, we're all friends, we're all in this together. You got those poor suckers feeling that. So they're easy to knife in the back, right? It's the easiest way. I mean, a guy that doesn't trust you come up with a knife, you're gonna have to knife him in the front, and he's gonna step back and he's gonna fight. It's gonna be hard to knife this guy. But the poor suckers in Europe, they're running around with blue and yellow flags on, just asking for it. You put your arms around them, hey, come here, buddy, and they smile. Yeah, we're buddies. Ha ha ha. Boom, right in the back. Shove that shank right in their back. They bleed out. They're done. So the easy ones was the European suckers. They think they're part of the crew. They think they're part of the party. They were easy to dispense with. For the most part, they're toast. Now, if they ever can, if Europe has not begun to fall yet, and if they can ever recover from this, this will be a miracle. But let's go on, and because we're talking about Ukraine. So now, where are we? The problem that the neocons had, and I'll go back to Iraq. I'll never forget this, and you might have heard me say this before. I remember personally watching Dick Cheney on television, and someone was saying, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, yes, we're going to go in. They're going to greet us with flowers in Iraq, blah, blah, blah. And somebody asked him the question, what happens if your rosy picture doesn't come out? What happens if it ends up a long slog? What happens if it ends up a long, dirty fight? And he said, well, we just don't see that happening. In other words, we don't have a plan for that. We're not going to accept that as a possible outcome. And so therefore, we're not going to plan for it. And that is exactly what happened. Now, they went into Ukraine and they had a plan. Keep in mind something. Ukraine ain't the plan. Ukraine's part of the plan. The quest is to preserve U.S. hegemony, to preserve what they call the U.S.-led rules-based order. What does that mean? That means the U.S.-led order, right? Now, you are a person, you're a group, let's say you're the U.S., and you're saying, for the last 30 years or so, we've been running everything on this planet. And we want to keep it that way. So we got to do what we need to keep it that way. The problem is that the other people on the planet have not been making out well, with the exception of Europe to some extent. The rest of the planet hasn't been making out well and doesn't like that order a lot at all. So now what the U.S. has to do is, for a while, it was easy because of their power, because of their strength. It was easy to maintain the order. The order maintained itself organically because they had so much power, no one would dare to challenge them. Now, people are sick and tired of the power of this rules-based order because it's so coercive and violent and predatory. B, so that's A, I guess if I didn't say A. B, the order is falling apart on its own because it's just a self-serving racket. And it is an neoliberal economic system that doesn't work whatsoever. Well, it only works to extract money from the working class and move it to the hands of a few oligarchs. So internally, this system is coming unglued. The wheels are coming off the cart. Internally, people are in the streets. And you got a banking system crisis, which is nothing but an extension of the 2008 banking system crisis. But again, your concern right now is maintaining this world order, this system where you're in charge, and the rest of the world doesn't want it. So what you now have to do is coercively, assertively, violently force a system onto the world that the world doesn't want and doesn't like, and is doing everything they can to wiggle out of. You're trying to hold on to a fish. You ever try to hold on to a fish? Squiggles right out of your head. You're trying to hold on to this system, and this system is like, no, people are like, we don't like this system, and you're like, we're going to maintain this system. And all over the world, see, their issue isn't just China and Russia. The Africans are saying, we don't like this system. Latin Americans, we don't like this system. Middle East, we're getting out of this system. And you're like, we got to hold on to this system. Well, the problem that you have is this: when you had the power, you used it in a manner that was predatory, that was coercive. And the rest of the world just simply said, if we ever get our day in court, we're getting the hell out of here. So now your plan is to hold this system. And Ukraine is just part of that. So your plan with Ukraine is, what do? We overthrow the government of Ukraine. You are successful with that. We then prepare Ukraine for a war with Russia. You were successful with that to an extent. We're going to discuss that. You initiate a military action between Russia and Ukraine, and then you manage that so that you control the outcome, right? Number one thing is clear to me: prep. Russia prepared for this. Russia prepared for this internally. They prepared in that they said we need to be able to grow our own food, we need to provide our own energy, we need to be able to make our own things, we need to be able to do lots of things to take care of ourselves, because we know that when this happens, you're going to throw sanctions, all the sanctions you got on us, and we got to be ready for the sanctions. So Russia had 8 years from when you overthrew this government, and let's be honest, they had all the way back to 2008, because back in 2008, NATO, the US empire, said we're going to eventually come after Ukraine. And Russia had back then, they didn't have the money now, they didn't have the weapons, they didn't have the things they need, but they knew then, we know what's coming eventually. So really they had since 2008. So they had 15 years, really 14 now, it's 2022, but they had 15 years, 14, whatever you want to say, to prepare for this. And obviously they've been preparing. They've also been preparing regarding war material. They have been preparing to launch the war, but not just launch the war, to maintain the war indefinitely if necessary. I don't know if indefinitely, but I'd say at least 5 years or more. So what's happening? Russia prepared for war. This isn't the first time Russia's been down this road. Russia's been down this road before. They understand the severity of it. They understand what they got to do when they have to protect themselves. And so they got some history here. So they began to prepare not only to be able to engage militarily, but to be able to support a long-term engagement. Meanwhile, the US empire prepared to engage. That's all. That's all. We're going to engage. They didn't stop to think, what happens if they did a Dick Cheney? We don't see that happening. They didn't stop to think, what happens if our proxy starts coming unglued? They start losing. What happens if the level of confrontation, of military confrontation, maintains a high level? Can we continue to provide the war material that we need year in and year out? Because ultimately, it's like this. When you train for self-defense, there's a couple of things you got to train. I have a cousin, we always talk, he's a black belt. We always talk about that, a number of things. And one of the things we talk about is, are you training so that you have a level of the ability to maintain your defense for a period of time? You can get a person that wants to beat you up, you know, the kind of big muscle people that all they do is lift and they're big and strong, right? They come after you, right? Okay, if they don't get you in the first couple swings and grabs or what have you, they're breathing hard. Are you still ready to go? Are you still moving? You're ducking and diving. You see them come after you. You may be able to move. You may be able to get loose and run. Now they can't catch you, because the idea is always to go home, right? To flee. You may be in a tight spot and you may be able to scramble. Remember, you know, somebody's trying to hurt you. You're constantly moving. You're rolling. You're scrambling. You're pushing. You're hitting. You're doing everything you can. You're moving. That can you wear them out? Do you have the ability to keep going, right? If you never want to get in a fight, but if you get in a fight, you want to be able to actively stop blows coming at you and to return blows, right? You want to be able to attack various points. You want to have, you know, some, as Bruce Lee said, you don't punch, the punch jumps out itself. You don't kick, the elbow, it all comes out on its own. You want that to pop out, pop, blows to come out and to shock your enemy. But what happens if all that happens, your enemy's still coming? You need to be able to maintain that level of self-defense for a while. You don't want to, look, if your enemy is trying to hurt you, what if it's more than one person? And all of this happens, you have to be prepared to defend yourself, and not just a couple of blows. Because what happens if a couple of blows are thrown and the fight ain't over and they're still coming? And you're trying to make your way out of a door and it's a bar fight and 3 or 4 guys or people are fighting. You need to have enough wherewithal to maintain that for a while and get out of there if you want to get out of alive on a given time. So I say all that to say this. What happens if you got all this stuff to have a heavy blow in the first fight, and then all of a sudden the fight lasts for a while and you're out of breath? You can get your butt kicked. You're going to lose this, right? And it appears to me that what the United States didn't do, what the U.S., forget NATO, this is not a NATO. NATO is nothing but an umbrella organization that the U.S. uses to bring its colonies together so it can take control of them, of their foreign policy, right? So, so the bottom line is this: The US, they didn't plan. The Russians did. They planned it from the looks of things. They got their factories ready, prepared so that they could build shells. Don't forget, they have a heavy industrial capacity, so they can make a lot of steel. Russia makes a lot of steel, a lot of natural resources. Apparently, they had all of this stuff planned so that if they had to go to war, they could maintain that. They could sustain a level of engagement. So now they're prepared to sustain a level of engagement. And the US empire didn't plan that. They planned for a war, but they didn't plan to sustain a level of engagement. So what happened now? The Russians had an advantage. This is what I keep saying. Man, it's like this. If you attack, right? If you're an attacker, and in military, and you're attacking a defensive position, the rule of thumb is 3-1. If you want to overtake that defensive position, you need to outnumber your opponents, your enemies, 3-1, right? Most people know this. Technically speaking, the United States empire was having a proxy war. They were attacking Russia on Russia's border. So Russia technically is in a defensive position. Even though they're in Ukraine, the US empire, NATO, is coming after them on their border. So technically, if you go at a superpower on its border, a superpower is in a defensive position. So Russia technically is in a defensive position. And I'll tell you why. They can fly out of their airspace. They can fire out of their own airspace. So they can sit way back in their airspace, way back with unbelievable amounts of networked anti-aircraft protection. And they can fire missiles all day at you. And they can build them, and they can make them, and they can truck them up to wherever, and they can just keep throwing them at you. They can fly their planes out of their own airspace, hit you, and come back out, and go back into their airspace. So you're attacking them on their border, so they're in a defensive position, which means you better have a whole hell of a lot of stuff, because they're going to blow a lot of your stuff up. So the US went in and they said, okay, here's the stuff we got to Ukraine to fight, for Ukraine to fight Russia. But they didn't stop to think, but what happens if this thing goes on for a year and Ukraine starts running out of gear? Now what do? Since they didn't have a plan, failing to plan is planning to fail. They didn't have a plan. They're at war with Russia. Russia's blowing their gear up like there's no tomorrow, and they don't have a plan. So what do now? They start going to their colonies. Germany, Russia. What do you have? I mean, Germany, UK, whatever. What do you have? Well, we got this, this, and this. Give it to them. Throw it in there. Now the colonies are like, but we don't have anything to protect ourselves, and we bought this stuff for ourselves. We're just going to give it away. Shut up. Do what you're told. And of course, the colonies are going to shut up and do what they're told. They're throwing their stuff in there, and they're watching their stuff get blown to hell. And why? Because they never had a plan. Now, a year in, and the US and the EU are like, we got to get a plan together so we can continue to produce more artillery, because it's not coming out fast enough. You waited too long. You can't do that. You all of the things that need to be done to get your ammunition going, you just don't have time. A, you've deindustrialized yourself in the US, so it's going to be tough. Excuse me, it's going to be tough to do it here. But B, you're awful late in the game. You're late in the game. Now some guys, two guys in a bar surround them. They're like, we're going to kick your butt. If you guys got a few minutes, I'd like to go talk to somebody and take some self-defense courses. It's a little late now. Just give me can we come back in 6 months? I just want to learn the basics, punches, kicks, blocks, things of that nature, and so if you could give me a little bit of time, I'd like to go learn how to defend myself, at least how to get out of a corner. You guys seem to have me backed into a corner. I'd like to get out of this corner alive. So just the basics, just some strikes, some, weak spots I can hit, things of that nature. Yeah, what do you think, guys? They're going to beat the hell out of you. Yeah, sure, right. No, they're going to beat you. You waited too long. You do not repair your roof when it's raining. You do it when the sun's shining. You must be prepared some kind of way. I'm not saying you got to be Bruce Lee. I'm just saying you have to have the basics to defend yourself, because if you get in a bad spot, it's too late then to say, man, I wish I'd have done a few extra push-ups. It'd be a little bit stronger. No, you're going to get ready to get your butt kicked, beaten. And if they desire, they're going to kill you. If they desire to kill you, they're going to kill you because you're unable to defend yourself. Not saying that won't happen, even if you are able to defend yourself, but you're giving yourself a fighting chance. So what happened? They waited until now the Russians, they're on the Russian border, and the Russians are just getting angrier, and the Russians are bringing in more troops. The Russians are bringing in more stuff, and they're setting up, a big fist for a punch from the looks of things. And the U.S. is now gotten to the point where they're throwing 17-year-olds on the front and 65-year-olds on the front lines. They've got to lie to their people. Oh, yes, the Russians are losing. They're fighting with shovels. They have no chance. So the only thing the U.S. has is some propaganda to feed their people and to throw poor, unfortunate people of all various ages onto the front lines just so they can get some bodies there. Untrained bodies is all they're throwing at the Russians now. It's a sad state of affairs, but they didn't have a plan. They had a plan to get the war started, but they never went through. They never sat down and said, okay, if it's short term, this is how we're going to do it. If it's midterm, this is how we're going to do it. If it's a year long or longer, then we got to be prepared to fight it. So we need to, we need to be able to produce the things. No, in fact, one of the NATO generals, I believe it was, says we could never imagine the level of fighting and violence and what the hell's going on in Ukraine. We never saw this coming. That means you can lose. I mean, there's no other way to interpret that. You're going to lose. You're in a bar, two guys come at you, one big guy comes at you, says, I'm going to kick your butt. And you say, I never thought I'd see a guy your size coming at me. I think I better get some training. I was in London in a bar, right? And this guy was acting a little weird, right? To be quite frank, let me tell you what happened. I think he might have been some kind of like Nazi white supremacist guy, because I was in a bar and I'm minding my own business, as I do. And this guy walks by and I just noticed the guy bump into me. Turn around and looked. And he didn't say, excuse me. He kept going. And he was like a tall, big guy too. I'd say 6'4", 250 or better. And he bumped into me and he keeps walking by. I noticed and I thought, awful suspicious. But situational awareness, right? If you're trained in self-defense at all, number one is situational awareness, right? You win a battle by not fighting it. So I kept an eye on him and I just thought, he's probably been drinking. 20 minutes or so later, boom, a guy bumps into me. I look, it's him. And he walks by real quick and around he goes. And I'm like, well, that ain't an accident. Big guy. So at that point, I thought, well, I got a couple options. But I don't want to leave the bar because I'm having a great time. So at that point, I decide I'll just keep an eye on this guy. So I kept an eye on him. When I saw him on one part of the bar, I went to the other. When I saw him on this side, I went to the other. It was a pretty good sized bar. You've probably heard of it. I forgot the name of it. It's the famous bar, Hendrix, the Stones. Everybody played there in London. I'm sure you heard of it. But at any rate, my point is this. He's a big guy. And now here are my thoughts. He's a big guy, strong, tough. You don't want to take a punch from this guy. I know how to defend myself if he comes at me. I know how to get some licks in. I know how to, what I'm going to do. And, I have some options. He's far larger than I am. I'm a small guy. I'm barely 200 pounds, but he's a big guy. And somebody like that gets a punch on you, you're out. So I sized up. If I'm attacked, how am I dressed? Am I dressed in a way that's loose? Am I, if I'm cool, everything good? What is the environment around me? Am I, everything? I sized everything up. And I just made sure I was far enough. I kept an eye, made sure I was far enough away from him. And then ultimately, when I got ready to leave, I called an Uber and out the door in an Uber and I was gone. So it was situational awareness. Bottom line is this. In the back of my mind, there was possibilities. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he's drunk. Maybe he's got a couple of guys. What if I think, oh, yeah, I'm going to show this guy. He's big. I'm going to take him out. He's going to come in. I'm going to knee him in the groin. I'm going to do this and that. Oh, his kneecap is mine. All this kind of stuff, right? And he sets me up and he's got a buddy behind me that shanks me with a knife and I don't see that coming. So bottom line is this. All of those things have to be in your mind. So when you, what if he's got 3 guys and they got sticks waiting for me outside, or whatever the case may be, right? They got baseball bats, they got chains and knives. All of these things have to be in your mind. So you have to say, what's the worst possible scenario that could happen, and are you prepared for that, right? And so my thing was, the worst possible scenario, there's several guys, they got weapons, I got problems, so I'm going to keep an eye on this guy, keep an eye on my back, and then eventually when I get ready to make my move, I'm going to call an Uber, I'm going to go out the door into the right out. I'm not going to give anybody a chance to grab me on the street, right? Options. There is a possibility there could be danger. Might have been nothing, just a drunk guy, but you have to have that kind of situational awareness and plan for all possibilities, right? So when they're bad and wrong for starting this thing in Ukraine, but when that happened, they needed to have situational awareness and plan for all possible outcomes, but they didn't. They didn't plan for anything, and it is obvious. And when that happens, you're going to lose. If I'd have just said, I'll show this guy, never had any training, nothing. Hey, big goof, how dare you bump into me? Wow, you get punched in the nose, or somebody from behind smacked you upside the head with a bar stool. And next thing you know, you wake up in a hospital in London. And it's like one of these werewolves of, American Werewolf in London. You walk up and there's a pretty nurse and you got a Band-Aid around your head. No thanks. No, not trying to do that. I'd rather evaluate all the possible outcomes, right? Well, neocons didn't do that. See, and they couldn't even see this function. This particular conflict, because in their minds, this is just part of the big conflict. This will be an easy one. And then once we get this, Russia all sized up and torn up, and then China's just dropped to their knees and say, "We're sorry, guys, we have no chance against you." So they didn't really plan on this because they saw this part of the bigger picture. So what happens? They go into this thing, and before they know it, it ain't working out like they thought. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to maintain the narrative. We're just going to keep feeding propaganda to our people. That's the easy part. That's the easy part. You can feed propaganda to the schmucks all day long. But now you got a problem, a huge problem, because you have not prepared for a loss. See, when I thought to myself, what happens if he's got some guy behind me and he walks up and he says, "Hey, whatever," says something to me. And just when I look at him and he puts his dukes up or whatever, or he's giving me the business. And little do I know, that's all a setup, because there's another guy with a knife who's going to run up and I'm dead. So I'm preparing. My back's not going to be on the wall. If the guy comes at me and starts mouthing off, I'm gone. I'm not going to stand there and argue with him and fight with him. I am in London. That's a whole nother country. I don't know the country. I don't know what's what there. If there's a threat, I got to make sure that I am able to adequately address the threat by removing myself from a threatening environment, right? So you have to consider the possibility of a loss. So I looked at it and I thought, what if he's trained? What if, you know what I mean? Okay, what if I'm not the only one that has taken some self-defense training? What if this guy's taking some self-defense training and I'm like, I'll fix him, and boom, he squares up on me, and guess what? He's trained in self-defense and he's 50 pounds higher. I got it heavier. I got to take that into account. All these things, like, what if he's got 4 people? All these things. So I got to say the possibility is that I'll lose. And what will happen is, if you do that, more often than not, you ain't going to want to fight, because you're going to know it could turn out ugly. And if the neocons had thought this thing out, all of the possible outcomes, they'd have said, we better not do this. But they couldn't, because that ain't who they are. So now they're in a trap of their own making. Now they're in Ukraine. And the outcome, to me, and probably to you, looks obvious. It looks obvious at this point. And the question at this point to me is not who wins. It is obvious to me and everyone else. Look, we're hearing now that the U.S. is basically saying to their poor schmucks out there in Ukraine, look, make a last stand. Charge into the Russian machine guns. And if that don't work, then we'll have to figure this out. Then it's probably going to be done, right? Well, that ain't much of a plan. It's just that because they're not your people, you don't give a damn about them. So you're going to throw them get them to charge the machine gun nest. And when they get mowed down and they lose, all right, then we'll figure it out. What that means at that point is, You are now saying, basically, and this is clear to me, the US empire is making its last gasp at this. Now, keep in mind, there's neocons here that are saying, well, this didn't work out. Let's go fight China. As stupid as that seems. Well, I guess we got to drop this so we can go after China. Let's continue this and we'll talk about that. We'll continue down this road and we'll talk about that. The idea of you're going to just start a war against a major superpower, drag all of your allies into it, drive them into absolute dire poverty with no future, and then just say, crap, this didn't work, huh? All right, we'll go over here and fight China. That may work in Afghanistan, Vietnam, and stuff like this. You got a different animal this time. You got a different issue this time. So what the end of this thing looks like at this point is clear to me. It looks like the collapse of the Ukrainian military, the political, economic, and military collapse for Ukraine. That's what it looks like to me. Russia's making it clear. Look, we can't do a deal with you people because you're lying bastards. Well, they're neocons, so I mean, you're going to argue with the Russians on that one. Pretty obvious. They've lied over and over, lied, cheated, and stolen. So you can't very well trust them. So what Russia's saying is, look, we have to win on the battlefield. You guys said it first. Here is all we have to say. So now, at some point, Russia's going to be. At some point, this is the way I see it. The Russian military will be overwhelming the Ukrainian military to a point of collapse. At that point, there are going to be a couple of options for the US empire. Let me just say this. One of them ain't stepping in. You know, were you going to send 101st Airborne, 4,000 or 5,000 guys with a couple of tanks against an army of 500,000 men? So you don't have an option at this point. The US empire doesn't have an option of coming in, of sending in the cavalry to save the day. They don't have a cavalry. And might I add, what little they got has already been dismembered because they continue to send everything to Ukraine to fight the Russians. So what little you got, the Polish, the Slovakia, I think Slovakia just announced that they just sent like the last that they have. A number of, was it Slovakia or Latvia? One of them just said, yeah, the last stuff we got, we sent it to Ukraine. So they're out. They're done. We're done. We're not in any fights because what little we had, we just sent the rest of it to Ukraine. So they're setting up some offense. And I tend to believe, let's face it, the Russians ain't stupid. They're probably sitting there saying, okay, you're planning on doing an offense in the spring. We're going to set up for that offense. And if you do that, we're going to set up a pincer movement where we cut it off and wipe it out. So I would expect that the worst thing they could do is an offense. I may be wrong, maybe a powerful offensive, but I would suspect the Russians are planning for that offensive, and it will include cutting it off and wiping and destroying the offensive, destroying the entire offensive, and not saying, hey, man, we're going to bargain about this. Well, at some point. So it looks to me that the collapse of the Ukrainian military, at that point, there's not going to be enough of the Ukrainian military to defend Kiev, to defend anything. And the Russians can then run roughshod. They can go where they want. They can continue. Now, there's some other areas where there's the Ukrainian are dug in. Don't get me wrong. I don't think that's it. But when the Battle of the Donbass is over, when the Battle of Eastern Ukraine is over, and I suspect it ends with a massive, unspeakable losses and destruction by Ukraine, at that point, it becomes obvious to the U.S. allies, what the hell are we doing now? You know what I mean? What are we doing here? We put everything we had in, and it got stomped. And the positions that are left are far smaller. They're not as well defended as what the Russians have already defeated. And we're running short of war material. What are we going to send them? They're not, they're running out of ammo. They're running out of stuff. Not saying that the Ukrainians are just going to fold it in, but at some point, I think we're looking at some level of collapse. And I believe it's Slovakia right now. There's a guy named something Nico or Rico. He's opposed to this constant support of Ukraine, and he's set to win because I think it's Slovakia, I believe it was. Their government fell, and they're going to have a snap election, and it looks like the winner there is going to be may very well be a person who's not in favor of this crap, unless the U.S. comes in and does the usual meddling and cheating and in the election. But that could have its own consequences. So it looks like what we're looking at is some kind of a end game where the Russians win. The Russians win, the Russians win, the Russians win. And the Russians don't win little, and they don't kind of win. And it isn't you could say the Russians win and you could say the Russians lose. It's the Russians win, and they're going to take every damn thing they want to. And it is going to be an obvious L for the Biden team. And he's going to have to deal with his vassals and his colonies because they're going to be looking pretty stupid. What are they going to do? We did all of that. We gave up everything. We told our people that the Russians were fighting with shovels. We continued with this narrative of absurdity. And in the end, the stupid Russian bots like Garland and people like him who kept saying, I don't think you're being told the truth. I think the Russians are going to win this thing. And I think they were always going to win it. The people that they laughed at and they, just called us names and they censored us and threw us off Twitter and things like that. And we'll be sitting there and they're going to be saying, guys were right. And what do we do now? And we don't have a plan. And here's the thing about it. So let's look at this in a context of the bigger picture. Your plan is world hegemony. One of the things you're going to have if you're going to rule the world is respect from the world. The world's going to have some level of fear. What's it going to look like? The U.S. empire took everything, all your vassals, all your countries together, and you went up against Russia and got your ass kicked. And you got run up. You went to Russia's border. I mean, this is the way I see it. This is the outcome that I see. You took everything that you had. Everything tanks. Oh, we're sending more tanks. And see, here's the thing about it. You're making yourself look bad in this way. All of the propaganda. We're going to get them now. We're sending M1A1s. Oh, we're sending Apache choppers. Oh, we're sending M777s. They're doomed. HIMARS. Oh, man, they're screwed now. We're sending HIMARS. The Ruskies are done. When those HIMARS hit the field, it's over for the Ruskies. Every last one of them will be wiped out in a matter of hours, probably. M777s. We're sending Bradleys. We're sending all these things that you've hyped up as powerful, right? We're sending all these powerful weapons. And you get your butt kicked anyway. At that point, the world's they're going to look at two things. They're going to look at you and they're going to say, perhaps those weapons weren't as effective as you claimed they were. And number one, then they're going to look at Russia and they're going to say, man, you guys are bad dudes. Let's face it. Can we be honest about this? If and when Russia wins this, you threw the kitchen sink at them. You threw every wonder weapon you had. You used your space, your technology to target them. You used the CIA to do undercover stuff and blow up the bridges, to blow up the Kerch Straits Bridge from Crimea. You went after Crimea bases with drones and you used everything you had. You better not get your ass kicked in this one, and you're going to. So now, let's think about this. We're honest about it. The old school traditional cultures, I've talked about this before, that look at the tough guy, the idea of not losing face, of your honor. There's a lot of still societies where people kill you, if you disrespect them in front of their family. Well, you got to fight. You disrespect this man in front of his family, he's got to fight you. He's going to pull a knife. There's still societies in this world where they're traditional and those kind of things are there. How do you think they're going to look at it? They're going to look at Putin. Those kinds of traditional societies, they are what they are, agree with them or not. You know what I'm talking about. The Middle East, African societies, Latino societies. They're going to look at Putin. They're going to look at you and they're going to say, dude, I mean, he embarrassed you. You stepped up to this dude and he beat you down and sent you home. And you came in there talking trash with your HIMARS, with your M777, space technologies, all kinds of terrorist attacks. You pulled out everything you had and he lit you up and sent you home. What that means is that is it. That is curtains. There is no chance of maintaining, there isn't anyway, but there is no chance of maintaining a rules-based order. Why? Because the people have to fear and respect you. You step up to Putin and he beats you behind and sends you packing and says, we ain't got nothing to talk about. You know, hey, we're going to now, you're like, yes, we're going to do a counteroffensive. And then we're going to force Putin to have to negotiate. And Putin says, I got a better idea. You come over here. I'm going to beat the hell out of you. And I'm going to send you back home. Negotiate with that. You want to negotiate? Come over here. Come on over here. I'm going to show you what I'm negotiating. And he beats the snot out of you and sends you back home. He says, now, is that enough negotiating for you? That's what it's going to look like. You threw everything you had at the man. He lit you up, sent you home, and said, now, that's what I'm negotiating with. Negotiate with that ass weapon. That's the way it's going to come across in the traditional societies. And the Africans are going to be like, man, you Americans, go ahead, man. You guys are weak. The Middle Easterns are going to be putting their heads down saying, man, this is not pretty. You guys go home, lick your wounds, shut your mouths, hide, because you stepped up to somebody and you got lit up. Go home. Right? Come on. We've all I was a young guy and I had my friends and we were hanging out, right? And back in the day, as they say, don't sell wolf tickets. Don't talk a lot of trash about who you're going to beat up and you're going to do this and do that. You step up to some guy and he lights you up and sends you back home. You black eye, nose bloody, teeth broke out. Your friends ain't going to feel sorry for you. They're going to say, man, you should have kept your mouth shut. You shouldn't have started that fight. Now look at you. You got, as they would say, you got put back to factory settings. Shut up and go home. What do you think you're going to run them? You think you're going to be the big dog now? You think you're going to be the alpha male in the pack now? That's not happening. So they're stepping up. And from the looks of things, I think we see the direction this thing's going. They do. Everybody does. Everybody's looking at this saying, you're running out of ammunition. How are you going to fight a war with no ammunition? You're running out of soldiers. You're taking them to other countries and you got a less gas. So you're going to throw, I don't know, 60, 80,000 soldiers you've gotten prepared. You're going to throw them back into the mix. But let's do this. Let's throw them back into the mix. And you have an offensive, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, for 1 second, you have some success in your offensive. You go in there and you take back a couple towns. Well, you had some success in September and you took back a couple towns. How's that worked out? The Russians ain't going nowhere. They're not going to be like, oh, well, hey, Ukrainians took a couple towns. Guess we'll go home. That ain't how it's happening. You know what they'll do? If they need to, they'll get 300,000 more men and say, all right, you stick around in towns. Now, I don't think any offensive is going to have some success. But as I say, you must prepare for all contingencies. The Russians have A, you do your offensive and we stomp you into the ground. What are you going to do now? B, you have some success with your offensive. And then the Russians are just going to say, okay, we're going to regroup. We're coming back downhill at you again. They ain't going nowhere. They're home. They can't afford to lose this. They ain't going to stop. At some point, they're going to win. It may be this month. It may be next month. It may be 5 years from now. They ain't going to stop until you're gone. And at that point, and let me add this, and what we know is you can't maintain this pace for long. Meanwhile, you're looking over at China. Yeah, we want to confront China, China, and you're getting your butt whooped here. And the longer this lasts, and the more catastrophically wrong it goes for the U.S. empire, because they have no plan, unless their plan was actually to lose, which appears to be the plan right now. If they have a plan, it was a plan to lose, and a very effective one. But as this thing goes catastrophically wrong, you got to have some allies. You got to have some allies. And do you think that this thing is going to crash and go catastrophically wrong, and that the people in Europe, forget the quisling governments for 1 second, as they're falling bit by bit. Macron's days are numbered. Do you think that the people of Europe are going to join you after this to go after their number one trading partner? Do you think the business community is going to sit down on the sideline for this, for a second helping of this? Do you think they're going to be like, yeah, man, that was pretty messed up. That Ukraine thing was a disaster. Geez, we lost everything and we're struggling and our banks are falling apart. People are in the street running around. Have you looked at Paris lately? It ain't a pretty sight. And then you're like, okay, fair enough. That didn't work. Didn't exactly work like we wanted, but we got a better plan. What's that? We want you to all regroup, and we're going to go after your number one trading partner. And they're going to be like, last war we got involved with you, which was now, we suffered like we haven't suffered in centuries. You have literally set us back 3-4 centuries, and things ain't getting better. Oh, and by the way, you stole our industry. You wiped out our banks. You laughed at our faces. You blew up our pipelines. And you lost anyway. And after all of that, you're saying, now, let's double down and go on an even bigger, further away. We're going to take your ships, sail across the ocean, where they're probably all going to get sunk, and we're going to go after China. Oh, by the way, you think your economy suffered when we went after Russia. You ain't seen nothing yet. When we go after China, it's starvation time. Starvation, no food, no electricity, no parts, no computers, no 5G, no phones, no chips, no nothing, zero. It's back to the Stone Ages for you. And the Europeans got to be looking at it saying, how do we even make it through next winter at this point? This winter, at least we could store all of the Russian gas that we could prior to the winter, and the winter wasn't too cold, so we made it through this one. Next winter, we can't. Oh, and by the way, you blew up our pipeline, so we couldn't, if the Russians were giving it to us for free, we couldn't take most of it. We're in big trouble. And you're going to say, great, and now follow us after this catastrophe. The whole world's looking at us, just shaking their heads, saying, you guys are idiots. You have been humiliated. And then you're going to say to them, now, I know you don't want to go after China, because they've made it clear. The European countries, France and Italy and Germany, have made it clear they have no taste at all for going after China. And now the U.S. is going to say, okay, you guys were going after China. Oh, and by the way, Australia, here's the plan. Your country of 25 million, you ain't got but so much money. We want just about $400 million for 4 nuclear subs, which means you're going into poverty, complete poverty. Now, you definitely need those subs, because what we need you to do is to help these subs. You got to have them. They're very expensive, and you're not going to control them. We are. But we're going to use these subs to protect you from really bad, to protect we got to protect you from some really bad people, who your number one trading partner. So you're going to take all of my money to protect me from my number one trading partner, who doesn't want to go to war with me, who just wants to trade with me. And then who am I going to trade with? Oh, you're not going to trade with anybody. You're going to starve to death, is what you're going to do. You are going to live in abject poverty, is what you're going to do. Methinks that somewhere down the road, that's going to cause some instability in Australia, some political instability in Australia, that there may be people who look at that and say, I don't think this works out well for us in the end. And the way things just happened in Ukraine, these people are out of their freaking minds. You will be revealed for who you are. When the outcome of the Ukraine, people are going to say you didn't have a plan. You bungled and stumbled into this disaster, into this catastrophe with no plan to get out. And the Russians must you flattened you in Ukraine. And the Russians will impose their will. You know how the Ukraine conflict's going to end? However, the Russians say it's going to end, because they will impose their will. What happens? Again, there's always the what happens contingency plans. What happens? Okay, here's the scenario. The Ukrainians either do their offensive or don't, whatever, but it don't work and it goes bad. And now the Russians are on the march. The Russians, all of those reserves that they've been using, they bring them out of the closet, and wham, they go through the Ukrainians like a hot knife through butter. And now they're on the move, and they're racing across Ukraine, already angry, with a vengeance. And they're running across Ukraine, and they're slapping and smashing everything that looks Ukrainian, like military that they see. And now you're in a disaster. You're on your back foot. The people in Kiev are looking like, holy crap, our city's going to be surrounded soon by 250,000 very angry, screaming Russians. They're looking at it. You're looking at it, and you don't have anything to send them. And then you say to the Russians, well, okay, all right, sure. This is the way the Ukrainians think. I mean, this is the way the neocons think. Okay, sure, all right, darn it. Here's our proposal that you have to take. And the Russians are going to say, yeah, right, whatever. We're busy. We don't have time to talk. No, here's our proposal. We propose that you give everything back and do an unconditional surrender. And the Russians are going to say, we can't hear you. We're too busy finishing this military operation that we have. If you know anybody who wants to sign an unconditional surrender, we got an extra one handy. If you don't know anybody who wants to sign an unconditional surrender, then we just don't really have time to talk. At that point, the Ukrainian military is going to be surrendering like hell. And of course, who knows what things could happen. Very, very bad things could start happening to people at the top in Ukraine when they realize that the wheels are coming off the cart and ain't nobody there to help them. Ain't nobody there to back them out. Ain't no cavalry coming. What's going to happen is people are going to start thinking, how can I get out of this thing alive? And they're going to be calling the Russians for a deal. And the Russians ain't going to have no deal for them. It's going to be unconditional surrender. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. If you ask me what's going to happen, I think the likelihood is collapse. Yeah, I think the likelihood is at some point. I'm not saying when the war for the Donbass is over, when the Russians take Bakhmut and Avdiivka and some of these other places, and then they move forward, and there's some other reinforced towns, and they hit those, and they're going to maybe fighting in those for a while. The Russians don't seem to be in any rush because things are going in their direction. But at some point, I'm just saying, at some point, this thing goes bad for all involved on the U.S. side. And when that happens, what happens to the European leaders who have dragged their people into this? What are the people in Europe are going to say when they realize they've gone through all this pain and they're losing? And they've been told Putin can't lose, blah, 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 blah. And the U.S. empire will drop them like a blood. All right, well, we've lost this. Time to move on to China. I don't think that dog ain't going to hunt on this one. They haven't thought this thing through. And lastly, I'll say this, and it's something I was hinting at a few minutes ago, and they will have lost their credibility worldwide. So even the concept of a rules-based order at that point will be laughable. It will be laughable for them to say, we've got to challenge China because China is, they can challenge the rules-based order. It will be laughable. The world will look at them and say, really? Really, guys? You still think there's some kind of a rules-based order that you're in charge of? Now, meanwhile, as this is going on, as these things are going on, there's these alternative economic systems being built. So while you're doing, Russia now says they want to be a part of, Mexico says they want to be a part of BRICS. Your countries all around you are dropping or leaving you. So now you're going to have a BRICS with Saudi Arabia and Iran. You're going to have the Middle East, where the Middle East has come together against you, where the Arab Council, the Arab states have now come together, and now they've come together with Iran and Syria, and Hezbollah is no longer at odds with the Saudis, etc. And you're going to have an environment where the Middle East is lost, and you are a pariah in the Middle East. Africa can't stand you. Don't come anywhere near here. The people of Europe are going to be looking at you saying, you're out of your mind. I cannot believe you dragged us into this catastrophe, and look at how we're suffering. At that point, the neocons are thoroughly discredited. And how do they make a play for China at that point? How do they even make an argument that there's a rules-based order left to defend? There's nothing left to defend. People will be laughing at them, not to mention the economic calamity at home. And the political calamity of having gone in, dragging America into this. People here had to pay extra for gas and this and that. Tell them, oh, we're going to do this. And they wake up one day and they say, Joe Biden, you got in the war and you got your ass kicked bad. And now you're begging your way out of it. This ain't going to work out pretty for the neocons. I tell you that right now. They're going to have nowhere to go. And the bottom line is this. You lost the war. So people are like, well, at that point, they'll attack Russia. They've already lost to Russia. Attacking ain't going to be much of an option. And let me say this. The Europeans ain't going to be down with it because they're going to be trying to hold their country together. It's falling apart. Macron is not long for this political world right now. I don't think Macron at this point. I thought, yeah, well, Macron doesn't care. You're looking at France right now. My contacts, my people who know France well tell me Macron cannot make it out of this one politically. That's it for Macron. He's done. That the French people are not going to back down, and they will not stop until he's out of office, until he's out of power. That they won't stop. That there's not a way to fix it. That they can't go on for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and then the French people will go home. That ain't where they are anymore. That this is revolution in France. That there's a manner of revolution in France, and it's over for Macron. What government comes in next, what happens next, I don't know. But Macron, from what I see, he can't get out of this one. And at some point, this bomb with a long fuse, that is the Nord Stream a bombing debacle, is going to tear Germany. It's going to tear the Schultz government to pieces too. That there's just a matter of time. So you've got the elite ruling class, the discredited elite ruling class in Europe falling apart, and there's a banking crisis. Did I mention there's a banking crisis? All right, thanks a lot, everybody. What I'm going to do now is look at Super Chats, and then we will go on about our merry business, if we can. We're going to see if there's any. Here's one or two Super Chats. I had a great time last night. How about that show with Andre and Scott Ritter? Does it get any better than that? I don't think it does. Hey, by the way, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'm going to have Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. That ought to be great. Bad Dude Corn Pop says, my idea of heaven is pink clouds that end up being cotton candy. Now you're talking, Bad Dude Corn Pop. How about we talk to Valdez Mosley? Russia doesn't need weapons from China. Russia is the second largest global arms deal after U.S. Immunity from Western sanctions, the only support Russia needs, which China is providing. You're 100% right. I agree with you on all of that stuff. In fact, Russia doesn't need weapons from China. China needs hypersonic missiles. I think China needs technology from Russia, and I'd like let's see if Russia provides it to them. Russia doesn't need it. China needs Russian military technology, and it wouldn't surprise me if they provide it. Great analysis. Thanks. Thank you. J. Matt, super sticker. Thank you, J. Matt. Metho Nelson says, in case of conflict with China, how does one get material into Taiwan, given the fact that the entire rock will be surrounded? Quite puzzling to me. Bottom line is this. China's not stupid. I don't think they're attacking Taiwan anytime soon. If they did, it would be a block. What they would do would be blockade Taiwan and then dare the United States to try to break the blockade. That's what they would do. They blockade Taiwan and say to the U.S., you're going to break the blockade? And then if what is it? Is it you're going to go to war with us over Taiwan? And At this point, China doesn't have to do that. China's things are going in their direction. China's not in a rush for reunification. They are in no rush. The United States is in desperation, but the United States is collapsing. When you see your enemies going off a cliff, get out of the way and let them go. So I think China doesn't have to act. The United States trying to bait them into act, but they have no reason to act. They keep saying we're going to moving for peaceful reunification. J Matts, people unite for peace. Now you're talking, brother. Let's go to Rockfin. All right, on Rockfin. And Jim Garrison saying for myself, digging the blank out of your shows. Everything's in, everything's in. I don't think so. Thanks. Good sound, mind, and moral foundation. Thank you, Garland. Thank you. The true Davos patriarchs don't have another decade to engineer another putsch for world dominance to enact their fourth Reich. I mean, fourth industrial revolution, most dangerous time. It is. It is. Putin said it. He said, what's very dangerous right now for the next 10 years, I believe, this is what I've said. I believe that one of the discussions that Putin and Xi have is we got a bunch of idiots and lunatics over in Washington, D.C., and it is our job to usher the world into multipolarity without these morons, without these lunatics blowing it up, and that they are stepping lightly because they know that all they got to do is get out of the way and watch these people screw up. But they don't want to give these people the opportunity to do so, to demonstrate just how stupid they are. What do you think about U.S. AFRICOM moving to Morocco? AFRICOM's just a matter of time, just like the Middle East. Just like the Middle East. They don't want, Africans don't want them there. So they're there by coercion and force. And the other part of it is, as the new economic order builds, right, it's going to be harder for the U.S. to afford it. Hi, Chicken Patty. I used to chat with you on false lines. Oh, Chicken Patty, different call sign, Debita Smith. I think that's it, everybody. Wow. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Oh, let me see. We got a couple more people with super chats, I believe. Thanks, JF. There we go. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. I think that's it. Oh, Terry says, Russia and China are our best allies against our malevolent capitalist class, Garland, our Robinson today. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. I'll end by thanking everybody as usual. And you see everything going along. If you can do PayPal, buy me a coffee, Cash App, whatever the case may be, I certainly appreciate it. Anybody that can do Patreon, certainly appreciate that. $3, $5, $100 a month, whatever you can afford, I appreciate it. Last but not least, follow me on Telegram, rockfin.com. As you all know, we got 1,072 people, so we should have 1,072 likes. Share all of this, share my stuff if you can. You can do me that favor. You can share this on all your social media platforms. Last but not least, Rockfin, make sure you go to my Rockfin channel, rockfin.com/Garland Nixon, and become a member. Costs nothing, but if they toss me off of YouTube, you'll know where I am. So please, everybody, go over there to Rockfin and become a member. Even if you don't watch it, it's cost nothing. If you do watch it over there, you don't have advertisements, so that's always good. Rockfin is also, it's uncensored, so if they censor me here, it'll still be on Rockfin. So that's my alternative. And there's a lot of really good, check around Rockfin. You know, people call Rockfin the conspiracy theorist platform because, you know, there's a lot of people that just don't trust the government, don't trust the system. It's a lot of fun, a lot of good shows. You'll really enjoy them. If you like this show, you'll enjoy a lot of shows on Rockfin. And if you can, Rockfin doesn't charge anything, doesn't have any advertisements. The way they stay in business is they allow subscribers. So subscriptions $14.99 a month, or about $12 a month if you sign up for a year, because they knock a couple months off. If you can afford that, that's great. If you can't, hey, no problem. Just sign up for free and you'll see everything on there. I do one subscriber only show per month, per week. That's 9 a.m. On Wednesdays with Scott Ritter from 9 to 10 a.m. That's my subscriber only show. And, you know, if you're a subscriber, I appreciate helping it. I'm trying to, you know, get the funds together. I want to build a studio here so I'm not looking like an idiot in front of a desk all the time with a drone behind me. I probably ought to move my drone, huh? But at any rate, so thanks a lot for everybody. Anything else here? Did I miss any super chats? I guess I didn't. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good day. And don't forget, on Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Brian Berletic will be here.